What is up, guys? Welcome to volume one of Everything I Learned from ... Today, we're going to talk about everything I learned from Tom Purvis. And before I get into talking about Tom Purvis, don't forget to hit that subscribe, like, and do all that kind of stuff that helps boost my channel. So I have a bajillion followers, like some of you tell me in the comments I should have. I agree. But anyway, I cannot think of a more appropriate person to start with than Tom Purvis. If you haven't already, I have a video before this that is kind of the overview of, everything I learned from, which I kind of really explain in more detail, what really the goal of these videos are, what I would like you guys to get out of them. I would recommend you watch that first. I'm going to link it somewhere up here, maybe. But again, watch that one first. But if not, you can always just dig right into this one. If you search Tom Purvis and found this while you're watching it now, I want to start with Tom because I can say definitively he is by far the biggest influence that I've had in the fitness industry, maybe aside from my parents, because if I wasn't conceived, I wouldn't be in the fitness industry. But within the fitness industry, he has definitely had the biggest impact on my career, my profession, and just a whole host of stuff. So I have people ask me that question a lot, like, who are some of your mentors? Who are some of the people that you learn the most from? And again, if I really racked my brain and thought hard, I don't even think anyone else comes close to Tom Purvis. So I'm going to talk mainly about Tom, but realize obviously Tom's main education platform, his main life's work basically is RTS, Resistance Training Specialist. So I'll talk a lot about Tom specifically, some things I've taken from Tom. But again, of course, I'm going to talk about his course a little bit as well too, because I was exposed to his course first. Then I got to meet Tom. I got to learn from Tom. And then again, I learned even more just from the individual Tom, even more so than the curriculum that he was teaching me. I've said this before. You'll see me look down occasionally. Most of my videos, I wing it, but I actually made some notes for these because they're longer and I don't want to miss any stuff. So just the brief history of my time frame here of when I got exposed to RTS and stuff. I first got introduced to the content of the course, I think in 2006, I think is accurate. And it was at a time I had just gotten hired at a big box club. It was my first full-time job as a trainer. And one of the trainers there had gone through a lot of RTS curriculum. He had gone through a lot of muscle activation technique curriculum. He was definitely more of the thinkers. This was he was an evidence-based trainer before that was such a thing. So very, very intelligent trainer. And literally on my first day, he was extremely intelligent, maybe arguably not so emotionally intelligent, because I don't think he even introduced himself to me. I think when I first met him, he literally just came up and handed me a piece of paper and said, read this. And obviously I was 22 at the time and scared of everything and everyone at the gym, kind of. Not really scared, but obviously I had no idea what the hell was going on, a little bit nervous. And so he handed me this paper. The paper had maybe, 30, 50 questions on it. All different types of questions, all different stuff, some very specific stuff of, describe the shearing force that occurs at a leg extension, which is a trick question if you want to know what that one is. And very specific questions, broad questions, all this kind of stuff. And I didn't really think much of it. I read the paper and my first thought process was like, I wanted to know the answers to everything. I didn't know the answers to a whole bunch of stuff. I thought I knew some of the answers to some of the things. And then I read all of it. I thought about all of it. I might have looked some of it up at the time. And then I think it was literally maybe a day or two later, that trainer at the time, I think was the manager of the club. He was busy, or maybe he wasn't the manager. I don't know. But anyway, I don't think I circled back with him until a day or two later. And I don't know if that was a paper that was actually provided through RTS or something he had made himself or whatever. But anyway, I actually went and talked to him about that. And he goes, wow, he's like, you're the first person I've ever actually handed that to, the first trainer that actually read all of it and then wanted to talk to me about it. I'm just thinking, like, why wouldn't I want to talk about workout stuff? Like, that's my job. That's what we're here to do. So anyway, I just tell that little story because, again, that's really my very first exposure to what I would say would be kind of RTS content, if that is an accurate thing to say from just a list of questions. And in retrospect, when I look back at those questions, my thought process being 22, coming right out of college and basically pretty much just studying to get good grades and to pass exams, my thought process reading the papers was, I want to know the right answers to these. In retrospect, I might be wrong, but it was more so about just having some, thought provoked, and actually having some critical thinking and making your gears hopefully turn. And I think, again, that's what that paper was more about in those questions, more so than did I get them all right or how did I do on this test or whatever it was. The first time I learned from Tom. So I did some RTS certification. I'm trying to even remember, to be honest, how it was. It was something that somehow came in-house. I don't even know if it was technically the 1, 2, 3, but I know for sure the first time that I learned from Tom Purvis himself was 2000, I think 12 or 13. I don't remember which year exactly. And I was lucky enough that obviously I knew his curriculum. I didn't know Tom at all. Ben Pikolsky, who I was friends with and training partners with at that time, knew Tom personally. And through Ben, helped me organize having Tom come to my gym that I was trainer, that I was a manager at that point in time, and teach curriculum himself, which he pretty much never did at that point in time, because I believe it was the level 1, 2, 3 is what it was called then that he taught. And so it literally came as a personal favor, especially essentially to Ben, to come and teach it in person. And I was just lucky enough to be able to provide a gym and a location. The owners of the gym that I was at were awesome because they let me close off like a huge section of the gym just for my nerd type stuff. So all around a very cool experience where, one, it was great that Ben actually made that first introduction, got the opportunity to learn from Tom teaching a curriculum he didn't normally teach still. And then also I was lucky enough for the people that were the owners of that gym at that point in time, Crunch owners. That was Vince and Tony. I'm just going to say their names because it was very nice of them to do that. Vince Julie and Tony Scrimalli. At the time, let me close down half of a Crunch, basically, to have some educational stuff in there. So again, it was a nice effort on quite a few people to get something to come together that not just helped a bunch of trainers, but helped me massively. Again, aside from the curriculum I learned there, it was my first time actually having interaction and learning from Tom directly, which obviously we'll carry on and I'll discuss more, had a big impact on me. The one thing that I'm going to say about this, and again, knowing Tom fairly well, I'm going to say that if one thing that Tom doesn't like is Tom doesn't like people speaking for him or saying, Tom said this, Tom did this, this is Tom's thoughts on this. So I'm going to try and keep this video as much as possible of me saying, here's my perception of what Tom was telling me. Here's my perception of this thing that he was trying to teach me. I'm even going to talk a little bit about Tom as far as his personal history and stuff. So if I get some dates slightly off or some information slightly wrong, just chalk it up to me being an idiot and nothing from Tom, Tom himself. So that's my one little asterisk in there in case Tom watches this. Tom, if there's something wrong, it's me. It's not you, it's me. That's what I'm supposed to say, right? So a little history. Why the hell should anybody care about Tom? Why do I care about Tom? Why would I happily give Tom a lot of my money over the past decade or so to learn from him? Tom, his actual credentials, his education, he went to school for physical therapy. My understanding is getting exposed to, I'm sure he learned some valuable stuff in there at some point in time, but getting exposed to the way that lots of physical therapy is it's very much, hey, here's the problem that someone has. This is the problem. Let's write that down on a piece of paper. Let's go look in our book where that same thing is written down. And here's the list of A to B of how to treat that. And that's not really remotely at all like how Tom would practice now or how he teaches other people to think when they're actually presented with a client. So I think that's same as a lot of people. Some of his original thought process and stuff came from obviously gaining information from different places, but different people, and then really starting to think, okay, well, how do I apply this to people? Is this helping? Is this not helping? If it's not helping, well, why not? How can I make this stuff better? And so again, trying not to speak about how Tom was thinking at the time, if I don't know. But anyway, he was a physical therapist and then basically started to kind of figure out things on his own. And obviously that led to some of the principles and thought process that formulating RTS. I don't even know, honestly, when RTS started. I know that Tom has really been kind of a big educator in the industry. I mean, maybe since the late 80s, early 90s, somewhere around that point in time. So I'm pretty sure RTS was created some point in time in the 90s. Maybe I'll ask Tom after this and I'll put it in the notes down below just so I can have the thing correctly. But some of the stuff why I really relate to Tom as well too is obviously there's something within my brain that likes to critically think about training. And there or something that was in there that was ready to start critically thinking more. And he kind of basically, provoked that or, supported that. And, and helped me kind of cultivate that and grow that into hopefully having more better critical thinking now. But the other things that really helped me relate to Tom is I think first and foremost, before all of that education, he'd tell you that he's a self-proclaimed meathead. I think his real first exposure to training, working out, resistance training, really came from the bodybuilding world. And Tom was, from my appraisal of pictures I've seen of his physique, a damn good bodybuilder in the 80s. And I kind of relate to it as well, too, because he'd self-proclaim, say, doesn't have the best genetics. Same as I'd kind of say for myself, didn't have the best genetics, kind of made the most of what we both had. And then learned a whole lot from what are bodybuilders doing then? Why are we doing these things? Has still now dealing with some issues and injuries and things that he inflicted upon himself. And I relate to all that because, again, before I ever really was thinking about stuff, I loved going into the gym and just beating the crap out of myself, beating the crap out of training partners, just doing what bodybuilders were supposed to do. But then just really digging into more, why are we doing these things? Why does this work for, I do all these Ronnie Coleman exercises, yet my back doesn't look like Ronnie Coleman. What's the reasoning for that? So I think there has to be some obviously similarity between his path getting exposed to bodybuilding, cultivating a thought process when the same things done to different people not having the same result. Some people are going to go, okay, well, what's the reason for that? Maybe I'll think more about that. And so again, before obviously Tom, I think probably started bodybuilding. I don't know if I was alive or not, but obviously when I got exposed and started bodybuilding, I didn't know anything about Tom. But I think there must have been obviously some similarities in our path and some similarities of our thought process. And again, all of that obviously is the base of where his knowledge started to develop from, his exposure to the industry. Same for myself. And it's one of those things too that, it's just a fact. You're going to learn very well from people you relate to. And that's just kind of a blanket statement across the whole industry. So again, there's obviously things that about Tom, about his personality, about his own story that kind of appeal to me, I could relate to. And of course, that's going to be something that makes it easier for me to kind of, buy into the information that he's presenting, maybe understand it. And really, again, I like all that stuff. I mean, the whole point of all of these is so you guys understand where I'm coming from, where my thought process started to develop. So obviously knowing a bit of Tom's story, where he came from, because I didn't know that when I first started taking RTS, just kind of made like, oh shit, like, great, I can relate to that. I understand that. I did some of that stuff myself as well too. So that's just a little bit about Tom. Again, I think mostly accurate stuff about Tom, but things that I remember and things that stuck with me and some of the stuff that really honestly kind of helped with my learning experience from him, being able to learn better. Again, knowing his background, knowing those things. And again, when I say an educator, I mean, he's been all over. I mean, if you just Google Tom Purvis and look up some stuff, things that he's been involved in, it used to really be a lot going to more of like the seminars and whatever the expo things that people used to get to together before that we had this social media type thing going on the way that we do. So he's been in a lot of stuff for a long period of time. So if I'm going to start to get now into some of the specifics of things that I learned from him, principles that I learned from him. So probably the single biggest principle, if this is a principle, but my takeaway is not just looking at any of even the principles within RTS or even any of the specifics within RTS. Tom, more than anything, has helped improve my ability to think, improved my ability to critically think, hopefully, improved my ability to be ready to answer the question why. And that's the reality, I think, is a lot of people do the things that they're doing in the gym and they don't honestly have a good answer to that. And again, it's a good answer is going to be a whole bunch of different stuff, as I'm going to clarify. But again, especially if you're trying to produce great results, if it's not just about the training experience, if you're trying to produce results, especially if you're a coach, if you're a trainer, if you're prescribing something to someone, having a client do something, you better have a good answer for why all the time. Again, if you like training, like you just like training yourself, you like going to the gym and beating the shit out of yourself, you like going to the gym and just copying workouts that Ronnie did, that Dorian did, you like just jumping from workout to workout, that is honestly great reasons to work out. And that's not a joke. If you like the thing about working out, the experience of going into the gym, the physical release, I joke that half of the reason that I work out is so I don't murder, then that's great. So again, none of this video is about you have to train like this or you have to do these specific things. I think everyone should be able to answer, why do you train? And if you are a trainer or a coach, or if you are training yourself for a very specific outcome, I want to be lean, I want to be big, I want to be whatever, then you should have an answer to the question why. And I'm going to share some examples of really things that just stick out in my brain when Tom actually hit me with those questions the first time. And I think about times when people had hit me with that question in the past, and either I didn't have a good answer, it was not a real answer, being, oh, this is what so-and-so has always done, because that's what's always worked, just some kind of blanket statement that's not a reason at all, just like observations, like basically saying, oh, well, that guy's doing it. Well, that guy's doing it is not a good reason to do something. Results are a good reason to do something, but you basically need to be able to expand upon it more from there. So again, if I think the biggest thing that I took away from Tom, continue to take away from Tom, is hopefully improving my ability to critically think about all things related to training, be less emotional about all things related to training, and really have that answer why at any point in time. And again, what I'm going to hopefully go into a couple examples is it doesn't have to be something amazing. It doesn't have to be, why down to the reason that you can explain everything to the most minute, insane detail. You can just explain to the point, well, here's what I know, and here's where my knowledge base ends. And that's a good thing for a trainer to be comfortable saying as well, too, is, this is the reason up to this point. And I don't necessarily maybe have to know all the exact chemical mechanisms of hypertrophy to actually, say, why am I doing this thing? And so if I think about a story that always sticks out in my mind, I don't know if it was the first day, the first time, whenever it was when Tom was teaching, at some point in time, talking about lower body training, talking specifically about lunges and lunge variations. And Tom was bringing up some things to be aware of about lunges and lunge variations that may not be great, for specific joints, or may have some negative things that come with them, especially depending on how you do them, how you perform them, your intent, all that kind of stuff, depending on what somebody brings to the table with their knee joint. And I remember being emotional and doing a lot of lunges at that point in time myself, and doing a lot of lunges with clients at that point in time. And so kind of just saying something to Tom about like, well, lunges are good. I said something like that. Well, lunges have a place, or lunges are good. And him asking me why, and me just kind of stopping deer in the headlights. I had some pretty good education at this point in time. And ultimately the first answer that came to my mind was because I like them. And he goes, okay, well, that's a reason. I don't know if that's a good reason to prescribe them to other people, or a good reason to have some sort of a training effect that we're after, but it is a reason. And so if you think about that, you do things because you like them. That can be a fine answer for yourself, but that may not be the best answer, again, if you are a trainer or you're a coach and you're prescribing things to clients. So I marinated. I don't remember how long it was, but a few minutes later, raised my hand and said, well, actually, I thought about it for a while. And for some lunge split squat variations, I like the fact that they can provide a unique opportunity to train the knee fully flexed. There's some things you can do when you're doing, unilateral stuff as opposed to bilateral stuff, adjusting what your foot is on, your other foot is on, where you can get to a fully flexed knee where someone might not be able to in, let's say, a squat pattern or something else. And he was like, well, there you go. That's a good reason. I was like, oh, okay. So that just took me a little while to get there, got through some emotion, got through my personal liking of something, and then could actually think of a decent reason for stuff. I don't know why that sticks out. I'm sure Tom doesn't remember that, but it was a good first little thing for me to have a short period of time, because I'd been very emotional prior to that about very many things when having to kind of go through the growing pains of learning stuff. But that was one that really sticks out where, I was kind of emotional about it, wasn't really upset, but I was emotional at first, forced to critically think, and then actually provide a fairly decent answer. And then again, though, this was stuff where the beginning effects of me saying like, well, I shouldn't be emotional about any exercise that I do at any point in time. I should have a thought process for why I do them, why I prescribe them, why I like them, and what I think the actual effect of them is going to be. So now getting into some specifics, what are some things that you guys can hopefully take away? What are some things that I took away from Tom, from RTS? One of the number one things, this is good to know for yourself, for you to be aware of as a trainee, but especially as a trainer, especially as a coach. And this whole thing is in quotes. This is trademark. This is RTS stuff from Tom. Or one of the very beginnings of his certification. And I'm going to say it several times for this. If you're a trainer and a coach, take RTS. If you don't do it at some point in time in your career, I'd argue training is not that important to you. Sorry, not sorry. But they're one of their main umbrella principles where it gets into a lot more depth. But if you really can understand this main concept, grasp it, get your head around it, you'll be exponentially a better trainer. People don't like this because people like sometimes this list of, oh, they have this, here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, check, all good, all done. But the reality is, just from what people emotionally bring different to the table, physically bring different to the table, that's not a good approach, in my opinion, as a trainer. So one of the biggest things that they have is, what is a client, when they come in the front door, what do they have, what do they own, and what do they tolerate? And again, that's where that's stemming from some of the physical therapy stuff and just other stuff of, oh, you want big pecs? Check, check, check. Do these 3 exercises, good to go. Where that doesn't really take into the equation, what does somebody have? Can they actually perform that exercise? Can they perform it exactly as prescribed? Do I have to modify a body position? Do I have to work around pain? Do I have to change a range of motion? Do I have to change a loading pattern? There's literally an endless things of, okay, well, depending on what that client has, this checklist could be completely useless. The 5 things I'm supposed to do to fix this might actually be 5 things to hurt that person. And so once you figure out, what do they have? Well, what do they own? So I can do these things, I can do this stuff, but when they're doing it, just from perception standpoint, it looks like crap, right? How is their form? How is their execution? How is the internal response they're producing to this external exercise thing? And if it's not good, why would you move on to the next step of what can they tolerate? And tolerate goes into all the other variables that someone looks at. It's like, well, how many sets should they be doing? How much volume should they do? How close to failure should they be training? How much load should they be doing? If you don't actually check first, what does somebody have? What do they own? Why would you start to go to those tolerate variables? And so this is stuff that, again, straight from RTS, Tom's creation. But as a coach, working with a bunch of meatheads, working with some high-level people, this really has, again, helped me continue to expand and better formulate when someone wants to talk to me about the X's and O's, when someone wants to talk to me about what's the right amount of volume, what's the perfect split. If I don't know those first two questions on an individual basis, what do you have, what do you own, which again goes to individual structure stuff, limitations, injuries, who knows what, then goes into that whole form and execution thing. Why the hell would I even start to look at what can you tolerate? What kind of response am I getting? Because if we don't look at those individual things first, all the rest of that couldn't matter less. All these things on paper going to the wrong direction or causing orthopedic issues is obviously not having the effect that we're looking at. So that's one of my biggest things when I have trainers, they'll ask me very specific questions. Oh, I've got this, Mrs. Jones comes in for the first time and does this. What do I do? And again, I'm all for trying to give some guidelines or some principles, but ultimately, I don't know what that person has. I don't know what they own, and I don't know what they can tolerate. And so again, that's one of the things I think when people get exposed to RTS, it makes you think. It makes you actually understand to a certain degree, how a person's individual body is and what they individually bring to the table. Holy crap, that's important. I just can't apply this random checklist that's, unemotional and has no awareness of Mrs. Jones and what she brings to the table. So some trainers just like that. Give me my checklist. But the reality is if you go to RTS, you go through it, you're not necessarily going to come out with all these checklists and these templates of here's my perfect split, here's my perfect stuff. You're going to be forced to think to some capacity, which again, I say some people don't like RTS. Maybe some people don't like to think. So then from there, some other stuff, getting a little bit into the nitty gritty, is, know your anatomy. And that's really kind of a lot of the base of, instead of thinking this exercise thing, I want this muscle big, I'm going to check this list. Just having some basic understanding, and depending on your level, from an individual level to a more advanced level, starts with knowing your origin and insertion. And I always say too, like, this is something you hear Dorian Yates talk about when he started training. He actually thought about, okay, well, what does this muscle do? Dorian Yates will tell you, he read a lot of anatomy stuff, and figuring out your anatomy is huge. This is when he, again, if you think about how Dorian formulated the split that worked for him, he didn't say, I got to do all these exercises that Lee Haney was doing at the time, who was Mr. Olympia at this time, because he figured out and did some of them and they didn't work for him. He said, okay, I'm going to do this anatomy thing, figure out this origin to insertion thing, and then come to the best solutions, knowing that stuff for myself. And so again, whether you're a bodybuilder, whether you're a trainer, whether you're a coach, some idea of anatomy is massively important. Again, just having some idea of what do we have underlying there? What do we have with joint stuff, or what do we think we have with joint stuff? What do we have from this muscle standpoint? The cool thing about bodybuilding is lots of times you can actually see that stuff. It's bigger, and sometimes people are leaner. So if you work with bodybuilders compared to a normal population, some of that stuff can actually be, okay, I know these things. Oh, cool, I can actually see this stuff. And you should see this stuff when you're in the gym as well too. And that's one of the cool things, again, from Tom that relates right to this stuff. Is he'll be one of the first to say that bodybuilders had a lot of stuff figured out right before everyone else. Bodybuilders were focused on an internal response. Bodybuilders knew they weren't powerlifters. Looking back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they talked about this mind-muscle connection. They talked about knowing that, kind of this origin insertion type thing, this feel type thing. And they knew they were trying to have this response to a specific muscle, as opposed to just a lot of the stuff at that point in time was just move stuff from A to B. And so again, all that stuff, understanding your anatomy, and the next point I'm going to get into is understanding some basic mechanics, will really start to help you make better gym decisions and look at exercises in a different way, where it's not just this checklist of stuff, this exercise does this. Well, somebody else already built that exercise, with that deeper understanding, hopefully in mind. And the reality is, if we understand where some of the stuff in the industry came from and who created it, some people just actually had no idea what they were doing, and that shit just gets perpetuated. And so again, I always like to talk about, RTS is very mechanics heavy, depending on your definition of mechanics. And some people will tend to attempt to poo-poo that by doing something stupid, or by an oversimplification, again, of kind of a soundbite or catchphrase statement of saying, well, the body doesn't work like that. Physics doesn't apply to the human body as far as just this moves from here to there. for some kind of accurate reasons that, again, okay, there is some stuff more complicated than just skeletal tissue. Fascia does these interesting things. Fascia connects muscles more than just their origin, insertion, and crossing over joints. And then neurology, the neurological side of it, there's some very complicated things involved there as well too. But some of the basics, people will say that. Then at the same time, I'll be like, okay, well, if I want to train your delt, am I going to go on the leg extension machine? And people will say, no, that's stupid. I'll be like, well, why is that stupid? It's like, well, your delt doesn't affect your knee. Why doesn't it affect your knee? Well, it doesn't cross over that joint. Okay, so muscles crossing over joint is important. Okay, and it's like, okay, well, we know that I want to do this delt thing. So, how well would it work if I do this pull down type thing? It's like, well, you can't do a pull down to do your delt. Well, why not? And it's like, well, we're moving this way. Something on top has to pull that way. Like, oh, okay, well, guess what? That's a mechanic-y type thing. Things can pull origin to insertion, having some basic understanding of joints and the planes of motion. And again, if we're going into this moment arm and internal things will have a mechanical ability or mechanical advantage to move stuff that other things won't. So some people have this inherent knowledge that basically the inherent knowledge is that, yes, mechanics does matter. Mechanics is important. Again, if I have this goal of raising my arm up, there's a reason most people be like, oh, I can't use stuff down here to do that. That's a very basic understanding that some people have of mechanics as well too. So again, how in depth you have to understand all that stuff? Do you have to completely understand torque and moment arms and internal moment arms and, planes and lines of pull and stuff? I don't know, maybe depending on your profession. But for some people as well too, if you have some base understanding of anatomy, some base understanding of mechanics. If I have a string and I want to pull a certain direction, there's only going to pull certain directions. And so some of that is there. You can simplify some things that we know before you kind of have a deeper understanding of that more complicated stuff. Yes, there's some interesting things that happen that, okay, it's more than just mechanics. Obviously, your brain controls all of that stuff. Fascia does transfer force to some degree. But again, we can kind of simplify some stuff because, again, we know that skeletal muscle does some things. We know that it has a role, and we have that from not just nerdy sciencey stuff, but we have that just from evidence of people have been using muscles since as long as people have been around. And when they use their muscles and move things in a certain way, some of it we can literally visually see stuff in action, and we can see the results of that as well too. Some of the other things, really big things when I talk about, my understanding of some of my concepts that I try and build exercises are really all just expanses of stuff that I learned from RTS. So when I talk so much about profiles, 99% of my knowledge comes from RTS, just understanding that, your body is capable of producing force, when moving in a certain way, moving through a certain range of motion, and an exercise is going to apply force in a specific way through a certain range of motion. And really from my bodybuilding kind of standpoint, although you could argue it's important to everybody, just some base understanding of how being aware of those two things, sometimes attempting to match those things, is a very important thing just for this notion of efficiency. And then just a very important thing too, again, if we're talking about that basics of physics, basics of mechanics, ultimately we're using all this external stuff, all this external force to produce this internal response, this internal response occurring around our joints, and then ultimately our muscles responding to that force that we're creating around the joint. So a lot of my stuff that comes from profiles really stems from RTS. When I'm talking things like alignment, that stems from some base knowledge of anatomy. When I'm talking about this notion of bracing, that's straight from really understanding, again, stuff from Tom, stuff from RTS, of understanding what are things that you have to manage, how much force are you capable of producing, do you have something to push into an opposition? So a lot of that stuff really was kind of created and stemmed and then kind of somewhat applied my own way, just as far as exercise selection and principles go. One of my favorite things that, again, this is when I talk about thought process and my thought process and my view on certain things, especially within the industry, is I love when I've heard Tom just talk about observationally about the industry. I kind of joke, you get this in RTS, but that he should have basically a separate certification that's just kind of the history of the industry, where observationally it is crazy to think about where some things came from, where people just do things because that's the way it's always been done. And if you actually dig in to see where the hell did this come from and what was the reason it was created, sometimes people honestly don't know. You can't even figure it out. And sometimes you find it and it's from some place not great, not intelligent, no real good reason. Someone did it, someone else reproduced it, and then people kept monkey see, monkey do for decades on end, and that's where we have some things. So Tom talks all the time about where we create these sound bites. Someone hears a trainer say something, or another person or a coach or even a certification say a certain thing, and then they just repeat it. Oh, that kind of sounds good. I kind of understand what they're meaning. And they just repeat those things where, again, if they were asked that question, why, If you don't have any why, then it's just a soundbite. It's just a catchphrase. And so much of that stuff is perpetuated within our industry. That's one of my favorite things to hear Tom borderline rant on, is again, where some of that stuff comes from, just this observational thing of where some of these, again, historically, where did things come from in the industry? People's, emotional response, things that people create around this stuff. Tom is one of the first people I've really heard talk about teams. People, again, just human psychology, like to formulate this versus them. This is black, this is white, this is right, this is wrong. And if there's something, again, that RTS really tries to teach you, is almost nothing is like that. It's more so just about, let's look at what this is. Let's basically just describe it. Let's understand it the best that we can. Maybe formulate what will happen if we do this thing or we apply this thing. But nothing about it is emotional. Nothing about it should be formulating teams. Nothing about it is inherently just right or wrong in and of itself. It's more so about, what does this thing have? What does it bring to the table? And maybe what happens if we apply this to an individual, why we would or would not do that. And so again, so much of my stuff, just looking at that kind of stuff and continue to expand off of that stuff, comes big time from Tom, recognizing just things that are perpetuated out of, tradition within the industry, things that are perpetuated out of emotion, how much emotion, teams, fighting, wanting to label things perpetuates the opposite of what you would want. It perpetuates the opposite of critical thinking, perpetuates the opposite of invoking thought. And so again, some of that stuff, again, really was kind of cultivated in me by Tom. And again, stuff that hopefully, just me existing in the industry then can have that look observationally, that critical thinking, which goes into everything with muscle building and everything within the world of bodybuilding. Some other random things that I think about, as I think about Tom walking the walk. So an interesting thing about Tom that people may or may not know is he's been training, like, I don't know if I'd still say full time, but he's still training clients, like a lot of clients. And Tom trains now more than anything broken people. So he trains people that come off of working with other doctors, other physical therapists, people coming out of stuff that didn't work, made them worse, or whatever it is, coming with stuff coming off of major surgeries, coming off of people that are, maybe paraplegic. I mean, there's a whole host of things where it's not easy people that he's working with. And so I always say there's such a unique perspective. There's a lot of people out there prescribing training that have never actually trained people in person, which is just insane to me. There's some people out there that are prescribing training and still doing training things that haven't trained anyone in a decade or 5 years or whatever. And I personally think that if you're a coach, if you're a trainer, it's always good to keep your sword sharp to a certain degree. If you're not actually in the trenches and not actually training people, and I'm not training people as much as Tom, you're missing something that someone else has, right? And again, I'm not saying that training people is the end all be all. I'm not saying someone that trains 40 hours as opposed to someone training 30 hours is better, but there's something to it. And so again, actually seeing Tom, that's one of the coolest things that I've been learning from Tom, is when you go to his course and you go and you take it actually where he's at in Oklahoma. It's in his gym, it's in his facility. Most of the time he has clients sometimes before, almost always clients after the course, clients very often during lunch. And if you want, he'll let you follow his clients. Like, talk about a level of transparency. If anyone, follow him working with his clients. If anyone's ever had someone shadow them as a trainer, it can be uncomfortable. And most of the time it's uncomfortable because it really makes you question, like, do I really know what the hell I'm doing? Am I comfortable with everyone watching what I'm doing? Am I comfortable explaining or answering a bunch of questions that's going to come as a result of that? So it's just an awesome thing that I've, and anyone that's taken his courses gets to follow him training with people. And seeing his cueing firsthand, so much of the cueing and the way he brings awareness of things to clients, the way he gets clients to do things, for all the big giant words that are in his brain when he trains clients. He doesn't talk about any of those big giant words. Why would a client care about a muscle's origin, insertion, or all that crap? It's, move this thing to here. Let's move this arm thing towards this shoulder thing, or this knee thing and this thing, or let's push this little thingy with that. And you realize, obviously, that's one of the big things that's so important to training. A lot of people are very concerned about letting everybody know all the big words that they know and how smart of an educator they are, but fall flat on their face if they've never trained people, because you don't realize, again, all the information in your brain, it's only as good as you can actually communicate it and express it to a client and get the client to actually do the thing that they need to be doing. You can say all these big words, but if a client can't execute, they can't connect, they can't actually accomplish the goal of the exercise, then all that knowledge is worthless. So it's just awesome to be able to see Tom do that stuff. Some of my stuff that stem from, he doesn't, right now work with a whole lot of people that are trying to get massive, but even working with normal people, everyone's so focused on all the variables, how many exercises, how many this. And it's been really cool to see Tom take someone through a session, talk with the client, and then kind of based on their feedback, like, all right, that's enough of this one. Let's move on to that one. And then when you're kind of talking to him about it, even having trained a person for a long period of time, each individual session, he's getting feedback, auto-regulating from that client, the feedback, biofeedback from that client right then and there, to a certain degree, dictating everything in the session, everything that people want to predetermine, write down their programs, make neat and pretty. We'll train the number of sets, change the number of sets, reps, proximity to failure. All of that honestly changes kind of session to session, I would say, not having followed him for long term with a lot of clients, but based on that individual's feedback and what they present that session. That same thing, what do they have? What do they own? What do they tolerate? Yeah, that's very important in the beginning, but that's also important every single session for clients and for yourself. So some of that stuff is awesome. It's seeing him train. So when you have and go take his course and he teaches you, he's going to train you, and seeing his ability to still take meatheads or people that are supposed to be fit or whatever, to or past failure, or actually get someone all the way to what they're capable of doing. It's a cool thing, because that's obviously what I do for a long period of time and a lot in my profession right now. And seeing how he will get kind of normal people or people that wouldn't normally do that, able to do that, and him express how important that is. Where again, if you don't know how far you're capable of taking someone, then how are you potentially going to have a client at some point in time that needs to take it there? Of course, not everyone needs to train to failure, but if you've never done it yourself as the expert, the fitness professional, then how the hell are you ever going to take someone else to it? And so some of the random actual things that I've heard Tom say to people that really stick out. So these are some of the stories, some of the anecdote. One, this just cracks me up. I remember at some point in time, if you ask Tom politely, he'll let you train in his gym before the course, during lunch, after the course. His gym is badass. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But I've heard him say, when everyone kind of comes in after doing their little workouts, and I always like to train there. Hopefully he's not talking about me, but I could be wrong. Come and sit down on the course, and Tom just kind of say, very deadpan, just say, some of you people, training in my gym, you really shouldn't be training. And like, people are kind of quiet, maybe some kind of uncomfortable giggles, waiting for the punchline, and then basically been like, you're just embarrassing yourself. And I don't know why I like that. I think maybe it's because I've had coaches for a long period of time from sports. I've had other coaches in the industry that I've learned from, where it's, as if someone that wants a high level out of their clients, you also want a high level out of yourself. And I've always liked coaches giving you a hard time, asking more from you than obviously you want to ask from the people around you, and demanding more from you. And so again, just the reality of everyone should walk the walk. And the fact that was one of Tom's not as nice ways for letting people know that, like, don't come in here and just do a bunch of nerdy foo-foo shit and get your protractor out when you're training. If you're trying to produce a certain result at the end of the day, some point in time, you need to know how to actually train, and you need to know how to actually train hard. So that's the joke, is you'll come to the nerd course, and that's why I joke. The nerd course attracts nerds. I'm a self-proclaimed nerd, so that's not derogatory. But some of the nerds don't ever actually like to get into the gym and do gym things. So again, all the nerd information on paper doesn't actually matter if you don't know how to actually go apply it and do it and train hard in reality at some point in time to continue to produce results. One of the things, again, I've said this in the overview video for this, and if you haven't watched, but it's, you don't ever want to go to anything just assuming this is the best. This person's always right. This information's perfect. Everyone else is wrong. And I'm sure Tom would be the first to say, obviously, he doesn't know everything. I'm sure he could give you a whole bunch of examples. And I've heard some of where he's kind of, constantly reformulating his opinion or progressing his, principles on things. He's constantly rewriting the coursework. And from what I've seen personally, this is a trademark that I've had some people that I think teach mainly for their own benefit, because they want to have people have a certain perception of them. And then I've seen people that I think teach because they actually want people to have a good outcome. They want them to learn. They want them to get better. And they want a specific outcome from the people they're teaching for, and aren't concerned about how they look going along the way. I've heard Tom say, I don't know, 1,000,000 times. I've heard Tom come in first thing in the morning after a class that was the whole previous day, upset, and literally say, I didn't sleep well at all last night. I just thought about the way that I taught all that stuff, and I don't like the way I taught this. I could have taught this better. I did this all wrong. And just, again, not saying Tom's perfect. I'm sure maybe there's some stuff that he's taught that, obviously, like that example, he will continue to not like. But you won't hear a whole lot of educators normally come in and sit in front of a class and drop their ego and say, I could have done that better. I didn't do that right. I did that wrong. I don't know. I've seen him at some point in time kind of, I don't want to say yell, but respond to someone's question firmly, which again, I think is entertaining. The same thing if I say something and I don't know why, and he's kind of we're having an adamant discussion about it. I've seen him do that with people, and then 10 minutes later, apologize and say, you know what, I actually thought about what you said, and your question did actually have some validity. I shouldn't have answered that way. here's why maybe you were right, and here's why I was wrong, or here's why I should have done whatever. And those are just a few examples that I can specifically remember hearing him say and do those things. And again, I think the funny thing is some people want to, again, kind of be the gatekeepers of the information, of the education. I'm this smart person. I sit up on my high throne of knowledge. You all are inferior. Worship me for how smart I am. Just kind of this appeal to authority thing where don't question me and da-da-da and all that kind of stuff. And again, the reality is I think people actually gain more value, more trust from someone when they're willing to recognize, hey, I have an ego. I'm not perfect. And, here's where things can get better or I can improve and that kind of stuff. And so again, I've learned from a lot of people and not a lot of educators, I'm sure myself included, I have an ego, of course, same as everybody else, aren't always willing to do those things. And so again, same for me, that stuff sticks out. I don't remember all the exact things that Tom is very smart and remembers in his brain, every single thing he's ever told me, but I do remember those instances when he was, open and willing to say, oh, I did this wrong. I could have done this better. This is right. I don't know. And that kind of stuff is massively important. And so, and then I think, again, on the flip side of that, from a knowledge standpoint, I've also seen him go above and beyond what I've seen pretty much, you could comfortably say any normal human being would do. And this is one specific example where if we were looking for a soundbite or a catchphrase in the industry, there's a million of them, it could be functional, sports specific, whatever. People have no idea what those things mean. But he was talking about the soundbite of closed chain. This is a closed chain exercise. This is an open chain exercise. I don't know if he's still researching this to this day, but I remember with one of the courses that I went to, one of the weekends or whatever, one of the several days, he had this section in the back of a classroom where basically when you actually look into it, he's like, where did this term come from? It just appeared at some point in time, appeared during a random decade. People started perpetuating it. And then out of his own curiosity, I think, trying to understand what is the actual definition. And based on so many different people repeating it, there is no firm definition. So basically, some people say this is closed, this is open. If your feet are off the ground, if it's open, if your feet are on the ground, it's closed, and blah, blah, blah. But if it's a machine, if it's not a machine. And the reality is there is no definition, unless Tom's got it now. But being the fact that this is one of those perfect examples of soundbite. So when Tom wants to look at a soundbite, he tries to find every single place that soundbite has been printed. And not just obviously in a social media post or something like that, but in peer-reviewed papers and textbooks and everything. And so I just remember him having this massive pile of a desk that's 8 feet long, covered with printed out papers, with books, everything with rabbit ears in there and tabs in there and stuff, with him just trying to figure out everything you could possibly figure out about this term. Where did it come from? What does it mean? Is there a standard definition? And so again, as much as I will say that Tom will be first to admit maybe when he has maybe a shortcoming in knowledge or needs to improve on something, he will also research stuff like I have never seen any other human being. So again, if you ever ask him the question why to stuff that he's doing, prescribing, teaching, you're probably going to find a better answer from him, 99 times out of 100 than you would from most normal human beings. Just wrapping up a couple little things here as well, too, because I could go on and on and on for hours about Tom. And again, some of you people are probably into this. Some are people, why is he still talking about it? But again, if you understand, this is the short version of something that personally I've spent, thousands of hours invested in RTS stuff, in Tom Purvis stuff, in flying to places and paying lots of money to doing stuff. So again, this is the smallest tip of the iceberg. So the whole point of this is to try and do it some degree of justice, despite how long this might be. It's probably the longest video ever on YouTube, since YouTube is 5 or 6 minutes and let's move on with our life, but someone's going to enjoy it. So if you're enjoying it, hey, this is for you. If you're not, sorry, you probably already left 12 minutes ago. But one of my favorite things about Tom too is, as far as what I would consider bodybuilding gyms, as far as what I would consider equipment, if you walked into his gym, it looks relatively clinical, maybe is the best word. It looks kind of like you would if a physical therapy center where you go in. But if you actually look at his equipment, it's probably some of the best equipment ever made as a base. And every single piece of equipment is pretty much every single piece, I think, is modified. And when I say modified, is cams changed, things welded, some of the craziest stuff. There are things that he has done, his understanding of machines and the way he has modified them. One random example that always sticks out is he has modified a Kaiser pull down. I don't even know if it was originally a pull down or something that he modified with it. If you understand how Kaiser stuff works, because of it being in air pressure is how it works, everything that you do basically normally gets heavier as you go through a concentric. He has modified a pull down based off of a Kaiser that is the heaviest I've ever seen a pull down at the top and the biggest discrepancy difference at the bottom. And again, why the hell is that important? For lat stuff, that's the profile you want. Really freaking heavy out here, really freaking light out here. It's probably the best horizontal, no, what is that, vertical pull lat machine I've ever seen in my life. And he built it out of a Kaiser, which again, if from the base, things not modified, that's the opposite of what you would want. And again, one, he has so much stuff in his gym that you can't take pictures of. I really couldn't describe exactly how he's done any of it, probably legally. I couldn't even if I wanted to. So there's that. But he has the best bodybuilding gym in the world. I joke his equipment is so awesome, so modified, the best profiles, the best bracing, the best alignment, the most adjustable, just to get in and absolutely destroy whatever muscle you're training. If anyone actually wanted to be the best bodybuilder they could as a result of equipment, I joke if I trained there, I would be much larger than I am right now, assuming I could recover from that efficient of exercises and equipment. It's the coolest gym I've ever been in my life. Every single time I go in before the course, probably even more so than the course, I just want to see what he's working on. What has he tinkered? What has he taken apart? What has he modified? And again, there's so much stuff in there you can't even take pictures of and stuff because it's that cool. Hopefully I haven't said something I'm not supposed to say, but you can go in there and take the course so you can see it all for yourself. So it's just awesome. It really is. I love training there despite it not looking super hardcore. The equipment is unbelievable. I mean, it's just the coolest gym, the coolest equipment ever. And again, literally just getting to talk to him about the equipment, how he modified it, how he made it, what the thought process was. It will vastly improve your ability to understand equipment, understand what the goal is, understand how stuff is made, understand some of the shortcomings of equipment, understanding how to make stuff better. If Tom ever wanted to, that he have an incentive other than for himself, which he kind of did with his own gym, Tom could make by far the best equipment in the industry. And again, speaking of where Tom has been involved, some of the best equipment ever designed was designed by Tom consulting and doing stuff back in the day when some equipment was actually good. So if there's some equipment that you really, really like, there's a good chance, maybe a chance at least, that Tom was involved in actually designing it. And so the very, very last things, thinking about the impact that Tom has had on me, some of the things that I've taken away. I don't take compliments very well. So I either get uncomfortable or maybe defensive or just have an irrational emotional response because I can't help it. I'm not completely emotionally mature adult. But one of the best compliments I think I've ever gotten from Tom, and just kind of speaking to the impact that he's had on my career, discussing all the stuff in his class and some of his more in-depth classes, when you really do get into some of the mechanics and the physics and figuring out some stuff that involves some relatively complicated calculation, there's times when I struggle with that stuff and I'm just like, shit, man, I just need to spend more time studying, or I don't understand this. There's other nerds in the class that understand it better. And I remember him saying, he's like, I've got a class full of nerds that can understand this stuff. But then when you take them out on the gym floor, it's just all out the window. And so the best compliment says, you see it. He's like, when you get out on the gym floor, you see all this stuff we're looking for. And that's the most important part for all of it. And I don't know, at the time, I probably giggled like a schoolgirl, maybe out loud, definitely on the inside, maybe blushed. But so it's one of the only compliments I remember a human being giving me that really, really stuck with me. There's some more. That's not the only one. But there's very rare times that I actually really take something to heart and be like, holy crap, I'm doing something good with my life. And to the point where there's times now where, Tom has wanted to do things with me or interview with me for various things. And again, if I think there's something that's a level of professional fulfillment for me, that's probably at the highest level, is one, being able to work with high level athletes, have a positive impact on them, or anyone, of course. But it's to have someone that's such a peer to me, and someone I've learned so much for, at some point in time, obviously want to do things with me. And I think if there's some goal for trainers out there, for people out there, it's for people that are originally the people that you're, I don't know, it'd be fair to say there's a point in time where I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm starstruck by Tom. I just want to talk to Tom, and again, giggle like a schoolgirl, to being, from someone being a mentor to being more of a peer, to being more of a colleague to some degree. That's been probably one of the most satisfying or fulfilling things in my entire profession, going back over these past 2 decades or so. So anyway, if you're watching, Tom, if you made it this far, you didn't fall asleep, thank you, because I'll never say it to you in person because I'm not, again, an emotionally mature human being. But Tom has had a massive impact on me. I have no doubt that I would be nowhere even remotely near the trainer I am right now, if I didn't have all the time and exposure I had to Tom himself, his certification, his life's work. And again, I intend to go to a lot more stuff. In 2020, when you guys are watching this, 2020, the only course that I went to right before the world collapsed, was actually going to RTS. So I've pretty much gone every single year, I think probably in some way, shape, or form since 2012. And I intend to continue to do so. And so that's my last thing, aside from if I can If you haven't gathered it already, for me, just putting my money where my mouth is, putting my time where my mouth is, probably not as catchy of a saying, but I've spent so much time and effort and money on that. If you are a trainer, I can't recommend highly enough. You take RTS. The world is temporarily still brokenish right now, when depending on when you're watching this and when I'm recording it. So they have a ton of brilliant online stuff. I have people all the time say, "What books do you read to learn anatomy? What doing this and da da da." And you'll find some of that. So I've had some great recommendations of different books and stuff written by different orthopedic surgeons that I found from recommendations through RTS. But the RTS curriculum is second to none. So again, if you're a trainer, you're looking for a place to start, RTS is the best place to start, the best place to put your money. You can start online with a ton of great curriculum. You kind of have to, I think, is how the course requirement is set up. Maybe I'll put as many links as I can below for RTS type stuff. But again, that's my big sign off, my big staple is it's the best certification you can possibly take, in my opinion. And again, you can start by dipping your toes in the water online, but ultimately go in person, ultimately go learn from Tom in person. Unless the class is booked and you're taking my spot, in which case don't go learn from Tom. But I'm just kidding. So, that should be, if you're a trainer, make your to-do list right now, learn RTS, take it online, go take some courses, take them when they're around you, and ultimately make your way to Oklahoma to learn from Tom himself. And that's all the mastery level stuff, as long as he's still teaching it. Don't miss out in case he ever decides to retire and not teach anymore. You will be sad. So that is that. Hopefully this long ass rant helps somebody. This is the inaugural volume 1, everything I learned from ... Tom Purvis. And as always, feel free to leave me some comments, some feedback below. If you have any questions specific to Tom, specific to RTS, I'm happy to answer. And again, if something was misrepresented in any way, shape, or form, blame it on my IQ. Don't blame it on Tom. Sorry, Tom. And until volume 2, I will see you guys next time.